Bill, it's good to be back with you today.
Yeah, it is.
I want to talk about our day. I want to talk about, like, if we could take a person's day, one of our days, and if we could break it down and dissect it, what would be the parts that make up our day? And I've come up with 5 things, 5 different things that make up our day. And the first one is God. God is essential to life. He's essential to existence. And so the first thing we ought to realize that makes up our day is that there's God. And I think of a verse, and it's Psalm 118:24. It's a beautiful verse in the Psalms that says, "This is the day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it."
That's one of my favorite.
And so when we think about God, we can't escape God. He's in our day, and so it's best to acknowledge Him, make sure we make God a priority in our day. And so the very first thing we ought to do is when we get out of bed, we ought to pray to God, thank Him for blessing us, and make sure we keep Him as a priority throughout our entire day. A couple more verses, and then we'll move on. There's another verse in Psalms. It's Psalms 46 and verse 1 that says, God is a very present help in the time of trouble. And so God is present with us. He is, Exodus 3:14, the great I am. And so that means that God is always ever present with us. So the first thing in our day is God.
Right. And He also says, "I'll never leave you nor forsake you."
It's a good one.
I believe that's in, I know it's in the Bible.
Matthew 28:20, I think. Yeah.
Right. You know, another thing that makes up our day is time. Time is made up, a day is made up of 24 hours, 1,440 minutes, 86,400 seconds in a day.
Wow.
And God expects us to be a steward, a good steward of our time. And a couple verses that I want to take a look at is, one is in James chapter 4, a couple verses there, verses 13 through 15. It says, "Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year thereby, and sell and make a profit, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It's even a vapor that appears for a short time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that." And the thought here is this particular person was planning out their life without checking with God first. And, we should always pray to God and ask Him for wisdom in the things that we do in our lives, and always keep God in everything that we do and not plan without Him. Go ahead.
That's a beautiful way to combine the idea of God and time in that day.
Another one is in Ephesians chapter 5. In verse 15, Paul writes to the Christians in Ephesus, "See then you walk circumspectly, not as fools but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil." And the idea of redeeming the time is to buy the time back. And what that means is take advantage of every opportunity, every minute of the day we have, because we don't know if we've got tomorrow there for us. In 2 Corinthians chapter 6 in verse 2, Paul says, "Now is the accepted time. Today is the day of salvation." And it's not something that we should put off serving God. It's something that we could die in our sleep tonight.
Yep.
We just don't know. So if there's something that we need to do to get right with God, we need to do it immediately.
So combining these thoughts and going the next step further is we've got a good God who blesses us. He's given us time. So logically you would think, well, in that time He would give us opportunities.
Yeah.
And so every day, number 3, has opportunities. I think of several passages. I think of Paul and his missionary endeavors in Colossians 4 and verse 3. And let's see, I've got it bookmarked here. There's a phrase used, and we sometimes hear people talk like this today. He says, "Meanwhile, praying also for us that God would open to us a door for the word to speak the mystery of Christ." And so Paul uses this language about God opening up doors. Mm-hmm. And we call those opportunities.
Right.
Every day has blessings and opportunities that we just have to have eyes that see. I think of what Jesus said about prayer. He said, if you ask, you will receive. If you knock, the door will be opened. If you seek, you will find. That's Matthew 7:7-11. One more passage about opportunities is Romans 8:28, where it talks about how that everything works together for good. It doesn't say everything is good, but it does say everything works together for good to them that love the Lord and are called according to His purpose. And so every day, whether we realize it or not, has opportunities, those blessings that come from God to do His will, to seek His grace, to seek His favor. And so we just have to have eyes and ears and a mindset that looks for those opportunities.
Yeah, and very quickly, one of the things that comes to mind is Joseph in Egypt.
Very good.
Every opportunity, every position that he was in, he took an opportunity to serve God.
Yeah.
So the next thing we want to talk about is the obstacles that we may face as in a day. And there's a lot of challenges in this life and a lot of challenges in a day. And I want to go to one passage. I could have gone to more than one, but one passage that came to mind immediately was James chapter 1, beginning in verse 2. James writes, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." And the idea here is, he says, count it all joy when you fall into various trials. And we know that when we have a trial, we're not like, oh yeah, I can't wait to go into this trial. But what James is saying here is, have a mindset that when you fall into trial, you know that this trial is going to be advantageous to you. And you know that on the other side of this trial, you're going to come out better if you approach it with the right mindset. You know, we have two choices when we face a trial. It's either we're going to be bitter about the trial and we're going to blame God and we're going to blame other people, or we're going to say, you know, I'm going to allow this trial that I'm going through to make me better, and I'll come out better on the other side.
That's very good. I think of what Jesus said in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount when He was talking about taking one day at a time, seeking first the kingdom, and not worrying about all this anxious stuff like food and clothing. But He said at the conclusion of chapter 6, He said, "Sufficient for the day is the trouble or the evil thereof." Yep. And so just as there's a God who's in every day, He's going to bless us with opportunities. The devil's real too, and so he's going to put obstacles in our path. But the beautiful thing is God can use those obstacles as blessings, like you said before.
Exactly.
The last thing we'll mention, and this is just, to me, one of those obvious things, like the nah-duh thing maybe we overlook, and that is not only is God in every day, but you're in every day. You are in your day. And so that really is about decisions. You mentioned 2 Corinthians 6:2 earlier, where it talks about now is the accepted time, today is the day of salvation. Well, that's about making a decision.
Right.
That's about putting God first. And so our day is going to be built on the decisions we make from the time we get out of bed to the time we rest our head at night.
Right.
And so we need to make sure we make the decision to put God first.
And if we make good decisions time after time after time after time, things will turn out well for us, and especially if we make the decision to follow God.
Absolutely.
Amen.